Hello there, and welcome to day 26 of Weekends Web App, the stream where we're building a web app completely live, all on stream, and with the code to follow along home here at github.com/weareoffslider/weekendswebapp. So if you want to follow along at home, grab this code, and once you've pulled it down from GitHub, you'll want to use git checkout and then check out day 25, because that'll put us onto the code right where it is as it stands. Now, yesterday, I'm just going to run up the server here. Yesterday, we started building a small little sort of promotion page, what have you, for the site, for the process. Go away. All right, we built a small little promotion thing, and that the main reason we did that is so we could explore the concept of CSS and start to do a few little things. So you can see that here. Let me just make it a little bit smaller. So we've got here, we've got this title section here. We've got past episodes and this little embed of the YouTube playlist. And then we've got some text, which I haven't gone through the effort of writing yet, but there we go. Okay, I mean, as before, all the disclaimers here, I am not a designer. I just put this together real quickly, just so that we could develop some particular concepts about CSS. Now, when we put this together, let me tuck this away. When we put this together, I wasn't concerned too much with, not MMA, WWA, home. All right. When we put this together, I was not too concerned with using classes or anything like that. I had to get away with a few things here, but I didn't want to really focus on that. So this is not the greatest CSS all around. And, I mean, it probably won't ever be the greatest CSS all around, but what I really want to address is the concept of naming right now. So as we talked about last time, these words here are selectors. So these are selecting against tags. So they're selecting against H1s, or if we look at how that file actually gets generated, we'll jump over to the style editor. So if we have a look at ourselves over here, and I'll just scroll down to the bottom, you can start to see the kind of CSS that has come out of it here. So you can see these headers, these H1s. So this is header H1, header H2, and header span. So the way these work is they look for any header, and then for any H1 underneath that, if they find a H1 underneath it, then that's going to receive that style. And like, this can work, but what will eventually happen is this CSS will get more and more complicated, and it's very easy for us to end up with certain things colliding in undesirable ways. So this concept of using selectors, we eventually need to sort of do something a little more sophisticated than what we're doing now if we want to avoid running into problems once we get to a larger scale application. And that's what we're going to talk about now. And in order to do that, we really need to talk about a concept called selector specificity. And we'll jump on to MDN because I'm sure there'll be something here that we can talk about here. So, yes, specificity is the means by which browsers decide which CSS properties are most relevant to an element and therefore will be applied. And relevant, I mean, it's a ranking mechanism that allows it to choose what is more accurate to what it needs. And there is a whole lot of information here about how specificity is calculated, but there are some main concepts that you need to be aware of. So we have different levels of selector specificity. So the tag or type selectors, as they're using here, they're the lowest ranked of the set of ways that you can select something. The next level is your class selectors, such as .example, or in our code here, where we've used .past episodes. Or attribute selectors, such as here, this type radio. This is a way that we can select against particular attributes, and We don't use this as often, but we will eventually start to use these. And also pseudo classes. So pseudo classes are just sort of concepts such as hovering, or when you click on something, there's like they're giving you just that little bit of extra definition that you can use to get around the fact that CSS is a declarative language. And then the big one is ID selectors. So ID selectors are a like you can put an ID on an element, and that's another way that you can get CSS applied. And the whole point of this ranking is that, sorry, hang on, my trackball is it's being a bit misbehaved. There we go, we're back in action. So all it takes is one ID selector to outrank a fair number of class selectors, and all it takes is one class selector to outnumber a number of type selectors. So it's very easy to tie yourself into knots when it comes to CSS if you start mixing, like if you don't have a proper strategy for managing your selector specificity. And let me see if there's anything else that's of particular importance here. Now here it talks an awful lot about the word important, and that's a way to make a particular rule more important than any other. And the way you would do it is by throwing an important on the end of the rule. Okay, important is bad, okay? There are some very isolated instances where you might not have a choice, but it's usually because you're interacting with someone else's CSS. If you need to write important in your own CSS, you're already doing something wrong. You are already messing up your selector setup. So let's just get that right out there. So yeah, so using important, as it says, bad practice and should be avoided because it makes debugging more difficult. So if we double back and talk about the concept of selectors, right? Say we have this past episodes thing, right? So if we have past episodes and we give it background blue, and then we have past episodes, background red. So here, we're just going to start to do a few experiments with the concept of specificity. And you can see there, if we look here, that it is red now, okay? And why is it red? So these two rules have equal specificity. You've got the you've got both of them getting the same rank and specificity. And what happens is whenever they are equal in rank and specificity, they are both equally applied, and the thing that will sort of win out, as it were, will be whatever came last. And we can sort of see that if we were to jump into the inspector. And we look at all of the styles along here. Hang on. I need to collect sections. Here we go. So you can see here that we've got this ranking of styles all the way along here. So you can see starting from HTML, all the inherited styles down the bottom, all the specifically applied styles, like this star, which means pretty much everything, it gets applied to everything. And then we start to get to the specific stuff. So we've got past episodes, that was the first rule. And then we've got past episodes. All of these are the same rank, and now it's just whichever one came last, that one is the one that wins. Now, if we were to say wanted to tip the balance so that this blue won the specificity battle, we could throw a div on there. Oh wait, it's actually a section, so let me get that right. So it's a section, and now you can see that blue is in charge, and I'll just need to reload to get the dev tools to catch up. So you can see here, even though this one is first and this one is second in the file itself, you can see that now we have blue as the background for that section, and that's just because that one. All right, so like besides this trivial example, how do we manage specificity? If we're going to talk about how it's bad to sort of complicate all of these things, what do we do? Like how do we address this scenario? And I mean, there are lots of options out there. and I am going to lean towards a particular one that is comfortable for me. But you're welcome to look into this more down the track. But I favor this particular method mainly because it's it makes sense to me. It allows for me to build isolated components and build them in a nice and predictable way, and it allows you to like sort of really think about how you name everything and how you put everything together. So, what am I talking about? I am talking about BEM, or Block Element Modifier, and I do a few little things to sort of build onto that. Block Element Modifier is probably not on MDN. But yeah, they've got a fancy little website that lets you talk all about it. You know what? We're not even going to worry about that. Like, really, block element modifier is not that complicated, and we're going to work our way through it to do a little work here. So, block element modifier is about figuring out what the components are on your website and dividing them up so that you've got this idea of a block, and then inside of it is all of its elements, and that way you're always styling against classes. So let me go into a bit of more of a demonstration of this. So we've got this header up at the top here, and let's say that we call this we give it the name of dot header. Okay, it's not very original, but like how about we go site header, right? And then inside of it, we've got this span, and this could potentially be, this is the logo of the site header, right? So let's give it a site header, and then because it's an element, by the block element modifier naming scheme, you use an underscore to work with that one. So that's the site header logo, and I just got to throw on that dot to make Pug render this properly. Now we've got the title and the tagline. Okay, so we could go site header logo, site header title, and then dot site header tagline. Okay, so not too much has changed now, other than like we haven't actually changed any of our CSS to suit. But this is sort of our concept of a block, right? And this block is isolated. If we can set up our CSS right, we should be able to hit all of the things that are on this with an extreme level of accuracy. And that's what we're going to do in the CSS now. So instead here, where this literally means any header on the website, any header that the CSS can find, and then inside that any H1, any H2, we're going to change this to this very specific sort of setup instead. So let's throw in site header as the top, and this will still work. And now, instead of doing H1, H2, and span, we're going to refer to them by their actual names. So ampersand logo, ampersand title, and ampersand tagline. Now, this is essentially like, this is a nice feature that nearly Stylus and Less and Sass all allow for, which essentially allows us to just pop the site header, put this text on the end of the site header, and this makes it quite useful. So let's just take a quick look at what the code that actually comes out of this looks like. So if we see here, we can see that came out as a site header logo, site header title, and site header tagline. Okay. Let's carry on and deal with the other little bits and pieces that we need to of this. I'll just move this margin bottom back up to the top here so we're a little bit more organized. And then here, so we're targeting the H1 and the H2, so here we need to change it to title and tagline. Here we're looking at the title, but it's actually the bit that appears after the title, so we could actually tidy this up even further by removing this. And finally we got the logo here, and we'll move this up higher. So there are a couple of benefits to this approach. First of all, we have flattened our specificity. So, what I mean by that is that every single one of these things that style these items, so the title, the tagline, and the logo, and the site header itself, all of them are singular classes. Okay, so even here, so we don't do something where, say we did this, we put in 2 ampersands. We don't do anything here where we put on extra classes if we don't need to. So see here where we've got site header, site header logo. That would mean we have 2 classes, which means potentially that would get in the way of our, if we wanted to put on modifiers or anything like that. So by keeping our specificity flat, all of these things, like, it's very predictable. All we need to do to add something to the end, like add some additional logic, is we just need to add like another rule with the same selector. And that could work anywhere in the document as long as it happens after it. So there's that first benefit. The second benefit is we can see exactly what this code references in the markup. So, and this is the thing. HTML and CSS are separate, yes, but they are separate in specific ways, okay? My line of separation, as it were, is between classes and the rest of the HTML document. So the HTML document should be semantically valid, okay? And what that means is like tags like header and H1 and H2 should be used responsibly. Same with sections and H2s and whatnot. And the way you can manage that is by using classes for all of your presentational aspects and using them effectively with this block element modifier sort of syntax. And that way you never ever ever select against a H2 or a H3 unless you're in some like user editable content or something like that where you can't actually apply all of this stuff. But that way you've got this clear association between this needing to look like this. So what we'll do is we'll carry on and deal with the rest of what we need to in the document. So if we carry on from past episode, so inside past episode, we've got this past episode frame wrapper, which was already just a thing that we needed to do. We needed to name it. So let's go past episodes title. And then we've got past episodes frame. Okay. So that's all good. It still works. Oh, I messed something up here. So let's fix that. Logo, tagline. What did I do? Oh no, it's all good. Firefox is just doing something weird. All right. So now let's do the same sort of update for our past episodes. So here we've got a title. And here we've got a frame. Very simple. Okay. Now, if we carry on, now we've got this FAQ here. And this is where it gets a little bit more interesting because this content, potentially we don't want to have to be constantly changing things inside of this content. So we'll just leave that one for now and we'll update our footer. So I'm just going to put a footer, which is the block, and then footer line inside of it. So we stop selecting against this and instead selector against footer, and then we add line to it. Okay. So in our experience, there's one thing that's sort of missing from the concept of, what's the word? There's one thing that's sort of missing from BEM. And that's the idea that, well, sometimes you have user editable content and you won't be necessarily able to put classes on it. Like this sort of section here where you've got H3 and P tags and stuff like that. So what we often do, so we'll just deal with the one thing that we do have control over, that like top level title. And then maybe in this section, we want to do maybe something that's a little more more explicit about what goes on inside it. So let's maybe just put in a div. Now, divs aren't great. Like you know, divs are actually fine. They semantically mean nothing. It's more when they get overused that sometimes they can make things a little heavy. But in this case, I'm not too strongly against using it. Now, the thing that makes this interesting is, say we put all of this stuff in here. Well, I don't know why, but it keeps on dragging my focus over to Firefox. I'm not sure. Yeah, it did it again. Why is that? I wonder if it had something to do with... yeah, I'll get rid of that. Ah. Yeah, for some reason it keeps on dragging my focus back over there every time I save. So I might stop saving for a moment. Alright, so possibly we could drag FAQ content in here. That'd be nice. And then maybe we can sort of make it really clear that all of these sort of other bits and pieces, so we can get rid of the H2 because that's the title. And then everything else lives inside content. And that way we've sort of got a scope for all of that to exist. Now there is a problem with that. It's not... it's sort of against the rules for BEM. So typically, because we do actually like to break the rules every now and again, one response that my business partner and I have had to that is to eventually do something that's a little like this. So any class that's sort of a context, as in it's allowed to have things occur inside of it, we throw a star on the end of it. And that's just our one tiny addition to block element modifier, is to refer to that as a context. So the idea is contexts are sort of like a halfway house between like the important rule and like just, you know, bedlam, right? So it's a way for us to handle the cases where we do want something to affect its children. We do want something to have a greater effect throughout the rest of the document. And this is just one way we use the concept of a context. One other way we could do is perhaps we could have something that themes the website. That might be interesting, right? So we've done themes in the past in other websites where we would have some sort of class in the body. So let me just demonstrate what I mean by that. So say we put on this class, on this body, we would put a class of something like dark theme. Oh, did it not like that? Give me that. Dark theme. There we go. So that way we could say, all right, well, when we're on dark theme, we look a particular way, but if we change it to light theme, then that sort of gives us a sort of a gloves off option where we're allowed to reach into all these different components with something that adjusts things to fit. So hell, let's do that as just an experiment, right? So say we wanted to have some sort of theming context, because we do have colors in various parts of the website, and we do set the main color on the body tag. So let's say we had a light theme. And just for fun, we'll throw it on the body right now. I think Pug doesn't like it very much when you put it on the end there, so I'm just going to do it like this. Okay. So let's start to build up this light theme, and I'll put these both on the same page just so that we can see what the result of my work is as we're doing it. So the first thing we're going to do is make the background white. Good-o. All right, what's next? Well, we know that we need to update the site header. Let me see if I can get away with just doing color black on it. Yep, very good. Now on the past episodes, on that title, we need to make that, oh no, color black on the past episodes alone, we'll do it. Now let's change the shade of the border on the frame wrapper. So we can use the ampersand to do that. Let's think here. Wait. I'm not 100% sure, but I think there is an invert option on like an invert function, but we don't really need to use that. We can just change this up. So let's pump this up to about EEE. There we go. So there's a light border there. It's not that great. Let's make it a little bit darker. Very good. All right. Now down here, we could potentially black this out, but I'm not a fan of that full reversal. I probably want to keep that text as it is. So let's try and do exactly that. So we'll grab the FAQ and we'll make the title color black. And then we'll make its background something that's just a little off-white. There we go. Now all we're missing is the footer. And we'll make that color of black. And we're done. So now we've got this concept of a theme. Okay, and I'll just pop this back over and oopsie daisy. Let's jump into the inspector. Refresh. There we go. So now we can see how this light theme is making its way across the entire page. And the benefit of doing things using this CSS style is we can pretty much see where we can isolate things very well. And we can sort of see, well, when we've got this context and when we've got this site header, because we're guaranteed pretty much everywhere to only have one level of specificity, it's almost guaranteed that we have the right behavior with this theme that comes up afterward, because it's got just 2 layers of specificity, okay? And we can very easily remove that and end up with everything changing back the way it was. But I want to be really clear here is that when you name things in CSS, it's not about what you choose necessarily. It's about being disciplined enough to actually use your naming scheme. Being disciplined enough to address areas where you're having problems in your CSS, and then using your changing how you lay out your CSS to support fixing whatever problems you're looking for. Like, I don't care what naming scheme you use in your own projects, and like there are a lot of different ones out there that like have little bits and pieces and how they change things. Like block element modifier is just one particular way that you can do that. But the important thing is that you apply them with rigorous discipline. And the thing is some, like, even as I said, like in the previous episode, like there are a lot of well-accomplished programmers who still have problems with CSS. And the thing is the same things that'll keep you programming well in CSS are the same things that'll keep you programming well in any other language. And that is rigorous discipline, consistency, all of the things that make you a good programmer in the first place. So it's important to keep that in mind for this here. What are other ways that we could make ourselves program this better? Well, we've got an awful lot of colors here, right? So how about we start to be better about putting a single point of control? So say we made a variable for this text color, right? And we did it like this. Well, now we can go through and go, all right, well, all of these, there we go, we've got our light theme text color. All good, right? Or light theme background color. So this is creating a single point of control, and like this is not a particularly entertaining single point of control, but it does demonstrate very simple things that we can do to start to improve the structure of our CSS. And this stuff matters. Like, this is, to be really clear, this stuff does matter, because as you get further and further along, you don't want to have trouble figuring out how everything lays out. You want to start to you want to have all these shared commonalities and start to separate them out in intelligent ways. So what are other ways that we could potentially separate this out? We could create new file names. So likely what we would end up with is a footer.less for this file. I'm not going to do it because this is not forming part of the app, but just to demonstrate it. We would maybe have a theme file. We would have a past episodes file. Let's capitalize it. Probably makes sense too, hey? And this is actually really important because I believe very strongly in naming things well. And the reason why, and I believe in naming things strongly in such a way that it makes it extremely easy to track down things down the track. If you name your files after your components or your blocks, as they would be called in a block element modifier system, it makes it extremely easy to use Control-P or whatever system you have to find that. Just like when we have database storage, it's more about remembering what we call things. And if we call things intelligent names, it turns out it's very easy to track those things down. If we do not call things intelligent names, or at least consistent names, I think intelligent is potentially a bit of a misnomer, because my intelligent might be your really stupid, or you might look at it and go, why the hell did you do this? Whereas I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense, right? So again, it's one of those things where it's not necessarily about what you choose, but ensuring that you are consistent about choosing, that you can justify it to yourself and your team if you are working with one, because that consistency is very important. And it can be very easy, especially in a wild west, where everyone's got their own ideas, and that is certainly the case in CSS, for everyone to just sort of end up go off and do their own thing, and that ends up being quite detrimental to you developing a shared code base. Pardon me, a shared ownership. So you want to be careful about that, and you want to make sure that you're approaching it in the right way. Okay, so I've talked a bit about block element modifier, and I haven't actually talked about the modifier bit. And at the moment we have no need of a modifier because this is such a simple page. But let's say we were to create a second FAQ. We'll grab out WWA home, and we'll just copy paste FAQ. And we'll make a colorful version. I don't much like omitting the U. It offends my Australian sensitivities, but because we are writing this in we are doing this in the word color in any CSS is COLOR. I'm just going to respect that. So what we added here is what's called a modifier, and it's not really doing anything at the moment, but it will allow us to do something real soon. Now, do we see it? Okay, we don't, and the reason why is because there's no actual margin on the top of the FAQ. So I'm just going to throw one of them on. This is not the best layout at the moment, but that's fine. I'm not too concerned as yet. Hang on, did this have problems for some reason? Why is it not showing up for me? Gulp decided to cark it. Oh no, here we go. It's got something here. Oh, that's right. When you put on a modifier, I just completely had a brain fart. When you put on a modifier, you also need to have the base class. So here we go. This is better. Right. So we've got this FAQ and then FAQ colorful. Now, with your modifier should always appear after your main code, right? So we would do something like colorful here, or it would be more likely that we'd put it down the bottom here. So when this is colorful, let's say we go background purple. Let's do that. Not getting a lot of work here. What's going on? It's either my reloader or something else. I don't know. Ah, right, the light theme. The light theme. I got to kill the light theme first, because the light theme is beating it in specificity. Or rather, it's beating it in it's not beating it in specificity, it happens after it. So, anyway. So, here we've got our purple. Let's apply it to the title as well. And here's the one place where BEM, normal standard BEM, disobeys the rule of having only one selected E. So here we can have ourselves a background. We'll give it a color of purple. And you can see here that if we jump in and inspect the element of FAQ, colorful, you can see that FAQ colorful only is one level of specificity, because it's got its one class level of specificity, because it's just FAQ -- colorful. It doesn't actually have the .faq. But the way this works is that your FAQ -- colorful is always after FAQ. If we have a look at the actual style editor and jump all the way down, you can see that colorful appears after FAQ. So it's going to overload that rule. And I mean, technically this could work if we did it further up, just fine. So we can put that there and that would be safe. And the only reason this is safe is because the title, that does have has two levels of classes applied to it. So that's why it wins out in specificity. Ideally, I'd want to put this down here. Now, if we wanted to deal with the light theme as well, didn't like that. So if we wanted to deal with the light theme as well, so we're not seeing anything right now, and that's because the light theme is winning. It has two levels of specificity, so we'd have to theme the light theme as well. So we could do something like here, which throw in colorful, which is, let's do purple, but we'll use a function called tint to add white to it. That's a less function, by the way, not a native CSS thing, but color operations are pretty handy. Right, and then what we've also got is we've got the title. Oopsie daisy. Let's do this. And in fact, this won't work I can't use the ampersand safely. So I'll need to do FAQ title like this. And we will do just purple for that one. So now you can see we've got that tinted purple, and then we've got the purple color on the text here. It's a funny thing that the eyes do where it makes this equal to this, but they are most definitely not equal. And then we've got further down. Actually, let me just verify that, because I'd be just talking out my butt if I made a mistake there. All right, so that's CO80CO, and then you can see here that's straight purple, which is, yeah, most definitely not that. So yeah, they're not equal purple. All right, so you can see here we've got our overload here, and like all is well in the world again. Now, if we were to strip that theme back off, you can see we're back to our regular colors. So this is some basic CSS stuff. There is many more properties and many more layout concepts that we're going to be going into as we continue on through the website, through the web application. But these will give us some sort of a baseline to work from, and that's really critical here, because we need to know how to name things, and we can explore the rest of CSS in terms of concepts as we go along. We need to sort of build our components out as we're working. And that's probably where we're going to go with this next. We've built something in this very basic little setup, but this is not sort of a long-term setup that's really going to help us. So what I think we're going to do next is we're going to revisit the concept of our build tools and whatnot, and just take a little detour so that we can get ready to build components properly. And while we're doing that, we'll start talking about React, which is going to be what we end up rendering our actual application in. At the moment, if we take a shorter side now, like sort of the CSS sort of concepts are over now, so let's talk about, for now anyway, so let's talk about how we have our renderer set up right now. So at the moment we've got this, these render functions, and we've got these little views which can initialize, update, and destroy. And that's all very well and good. But at the moment, they're just very simple. All they do is just throw in the HTML, and that's good for gold. Which, I mean, it works, but it won't work for a complex application. So we'll be looking to figure out how it is that we're going to build small, discrete components. And I guess if we were to go back onto the world of CSS and start talking about what makes a good component, let's have a think about a few things that make a good component. Because I notice that, I feel like I'm potentially going to be killing time to get this to an hour, which is, I guess, fine. Sometimes you get through your concepts a bit quicker than you expect. Right, so what makes a good CSS component or a good CSS block? Oh dear. Gotta bear with me, I'm not good at this. Alright, what makes a good CSS block / component? Well, I think we can probably all agree that it is isolated. So, isolated rules. Which means it does not affect its friends. It does not affect other components nearby with its CSS. So it does not contaminate. No rules going beyond it. Next up, what makes a good component is something that you can place wherever you want and have predictable results. And that can be harder than it sounds. There are things that can get in the way of easy positioning of a component. So when you put a component somewhere, if it has a margin, say, if it has a margin, then it would make it literally impossible for us to reliably just stack a bunch of components together and have them butt up next to each other. It could never happen with a margin by default on a component. So, and like the only way we'd be able to do it, like if we wanted to shunt this one over, the only way we could do that is with a negative margin left, which would be undesirable because then that would make this component worse, right? So this is a typical rule that we use to try and avoid these problems, is we actually say that absolutely, like when you make a component, in 99 times out of 100, you should have no margins. No margins. And how do we, then what do? How do we use margins? Well, what we are allowed to do is if we have a block, and if we have elements inside of that block, we are free to use things like padding. Let me just do... So we're free to use things like padding. And the elements inside of it are allowed to use margins. So these are elements. So these are allowed to use margins. So they might have a right margin here, and I kind of messed this up, but let's say it was almost a free column layout, and maybe it's like every third item does not have this margin, so it can keep on going. So we have margins here, and margins here, and margins here, and then I'll just draw the rest, right? So the elements, and I'll just put an E for these ones. The elements are allowed to have margins, but blocks are not. Blocks can have padding, blocks can have borders, but they should, 9 times out of 10, they should, or 99 times out of 100, they should not have margins. And that allows us to control that. And what if we want to use blocks inside here? Well, that's fine, right? Because we can create an element, and then inside the element we'll put a block. And that'd be safe. Because if we have some sort of block that we want to pull from one place and put it into here, that's totally fine. Because that block, and we'll give that a different color to make it clear it's from a different set, that block, because it's got no margins, will fit perfectly in this position. And this is a very common thing that we'll be doing here when we write the CSS. We want to make sure that, like, these components, we can reuse them in all sorts of places. And that gives us another thing, I guess, is that not only should a block be isolated, a block should, as far as practicable, not preclude things being put inside them. So if we have a block here, and then inside that block we use other blocks, so we'll say we'll have a yellow block and a green block. As far as practicable, the rules for this outer block here should not affect how these ones look inside their little region. And that's kind of really critical. So we have green rules for the green block, and we have yellow rules for the yellow block, and we have red rules that hit all of these parts of this block, but otherwise things inside of it do not get affected. It's not always possible to 100% do that, and that's why we have the concept of contexts. So if we have a context, that context might do something to this block. It might do a little alteration to this block and also to this block. And that's fine, just by virtue of how we sometimes need to do theming and stuff like that. But that's sort of a rule that we go for, is that if it's a block, it shouldn't do that. Okay? It's only context it should be allowed, context classes that should be allowed to do that. Now let's have a bit further of a think. What else is it that we would probably want around our CSS block? And I'll just find somewhere to write. Don't modify style of children. Alright, what else we got here? On this one here, it's margins on elements only. What else we got? So we've got isolated rules, we've got no margins, and we'll put no margins on blocks. Margins on elements only. Don't modify style of children. What else can we think of? Like, I think these are the key ones. The other aspect, so this goes beyond CSS, but eventually we need components that have a clear API. And what do I mean by a clear API? So API, application programming interface, it's, you know, like, or gee, I don't know, like, I don't even use the word API that often, so I don't sometimes mix up what the acronym's for. But either way, we need to have a clear usage of this way to use this component. And if we have things like modifiers, we need to be really clear about what they do. If you have a button, most likely you will have more than one style of that button. It might have different colors, it might have different borders, and maybe even backgrounds. And that's all fine, but it's important not to get to a point where your component ends up trying to be too many things to too many people. So don't let components overcomplicate. Too complicated. So what I mean by this is, say we had, and I think actually, you know, it doesn't hurt to go check out a site that we've worked on in the past. So this is a site for spirits and whatnot, and you can see here we've got a particular style of button here. Okay, it's a very specific and ornate style of button. We have, if we jump into the shop, we've got a different type of button down here. We've got different types of buttons all along the top here. We've got all sorts of different things that we can interact with. It makes sense for those to be separate components, right? We don't need to have one button component that does every single type of button. It's just not necessary, right? We can quite easily say that there is, if we have no better name for it, we can have a button A and a button B and a button D. That's not desirable. It might be better to say something like border button or ornate button or something like that. But in the end, you have to come up with some sort of naming scheme. But it's important not to get into a position where you've completely overloaded your components and you're ending up trying to do too many things with a particular component. If you've got a button that is a diamond and you've got one that is round and has different animations or whatever, it's totally fine to have different components for them. So don't let your components become too complicated and then mess up their API. Now, I think I'd just be making things up if I added any more from here. I'd be pretty happy with this as a list of sort of rules that we'll sort of go for as we're going into making our CSS. When we write our CSS, if we take a moment just to look back at it, we will endeavor to have like shared variables that help us keep things in order. If we've got particular sizes that are becoming used frequently, we should probably figure out ways to duplicate them. Where, like, see this 18 pixels, maybe it would make sense that this logo is also 18 pixels, or maybe that these are 17 pixels. So how about we do something like spacer 17 pixels, and by putting it inside this group, it means that it's actually it prevents it from being used out here. Like, I can't use spacer out here because it's not inside that scope. So that's something useful, right? So we can see extra things. So like there's a standard so the standard margin is 100 pixels. And that's another useful thing because now we can get ourselves a single point of control here. And let's just say that the margin bottom absolutely makes sense to be the same as that. So we can start to get rid of all of these. And I mean, like this is exactly the same as normal programming. Like if you're used to normal programming, you'd be used to eliminating magic numbers, magic concepts, and instead making use of variables so that you can reduce that. And by giving these things names, we can start to get ourselves a bit more of an organized code base. So that it can be very useful because it means that if we want to make sure that, like, you know, we want to change that margin, there we go. We've just changed that margin. What if we want it more like 150? Let's try that. Yeah. Now, the fundamental difference that makes it hard sometimes for programmers to see this is you sort of have to have some sort of implicit understanding that these are design systems, right? And these, like, they work as a system. And what I would probably do here is I'd actually divide this by 2. Oopsie daisy. And that way, that spacer there is also sort of fitting in. That's 75 pixels now. But yeah, if you're a designer, you can start to see, all right, like here is a design system. Here's like I've only got 5 different sort of font sizes that I'm going to use, and here's where I'm going to use this one, and here's where I'm going to use this one, and this is how it's meant to go together. And if you don't know that as a programmer, you're potentially doing magic numbers everywhere. You're like, oh, this one's, 45 pixels tall, and this one's 25 pixels tall, and this one here is 10, and this one's here is 15, and you don't do variables for any of it. And what ends up happening is now if the designer then decides, all right, all the ones that were 45 pixels, I'm going to change them to 40 pixels. That's not a quite so easy find and replace, because there might be other things that are 45 pixels, right? And if you draw yourself into that situation, you're going to end up hating CSS. I mean, and like a lot of people do hate CSS, and it's partially because they don't necessarily think ahead in treating this like a design system. And I just want to implore you, as we start to work through the application, to think about the CSS as a design system. And to a degree, like I'm getting some branding work done to help so that when we make this app, it's not going to look like total garbage. But when we start off, we will very likely not have too much of that in place just yet. So we'll do the minimum to make the CSS, make the application look bearable, and then we'll go from there. And we might do a little bit of design as it concerns actually laying things out in a usable way. So I won't do anything painstaking of design on the stream necessarily, but we will probably, like when it's concerning functionality and more, okay, how are we going to lay out this to here, how are we going to lay out this to here, then we'll start breaking out Figma again and make use of Figma to help sort of inform how we build things, or how we build out our CSS. All right, I've sandbagged enough. That brought us to about an hour. I'm going to finish this off with a commit. So this is day 26, implementing CSS in BM naming style. Promotion page CSS. That's good. Push that up. Done. All right. So we'll add a tag of day 26 and push that tag up. All right. So we're done with our commit there. That's oh gee, did I really? I did. That's embarrassing. I'm just going to amend that and force push it. Git push force. There we go. Force pushing is not a bad thing if you're the only one committing, eh? Generally, if you're working in a team, do not force push. All right, there we go. So that ends us for day 26. I'll be back tomorrow, probably sometime late because I've got getting the kids to sleep that night. But anyway. And we will pick up where we're working through improving our situation in tooling so that we can start to build out components in an isolated area, because we need a nice place. We can build things, but just like we have tests for our small pieces of code. We need some sort of place where we can build out small tests for our visual components as we make them, because especially as they get more and more complicated, we don't want to have to run up the entire app to see all of the different versions of a particular part of the system. All right, that's pretty much it from me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.